Now, our guest today is Liam Carnahan. Liam is joining us from the east coast of the US, where it's a far less civilized time than it is here for us on the east coast of Australia. Um, we met Liam because he got in touch with me after one of our webinars last year. And because of that proactive approach, we have ended up doing quite a bit of work with Liam. And in fact, he is actually helping Rounded with our SEO and our blog content as well. So we thought that it would be great to give Liam the opportunity to share some of his skills and expertise around SEO so that hopefully you guys can use that for your own websites and your own presences as well. So without any further ado, Liam, welcome from Maine, East Coast, USA.
Hey, Ollie, so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem, my pleasure. Now, Liam, just for the audience, perhaps you could give a little bit of an introduction to yourself, how you got to where you are today. I know that certainly over the last 18 months has been, a number of ups and downs based on what COVID has done to your plans. And you were living here in Sydney, and now you're back at home in Maine. And maybe just give us a flavour of what you've been up to in the last sort of year or so.
Sure. I'll give you the quick update. So I've been working in content marketing and SEO for about 10 years now. I originally went to college to be a writer and wanted a job that would pay me to write, and stumbled into content marketing somehow. But I stuck with it and ended up going to Sydney to work in a digital marketing agency there, and lived there for 6 years. So hello to anybody who's watching from Sydney. And then about a year ago, I got sick of working in digital marketing agencies. So I decided to go freelance and took the show on the road, or at least I tried. I had a whole grand plan to travel through Asia for all of 2020. Not the best timing. So I had to kind of cancel my plans and come home to the States, but it's great here with my family, and we're in a really safe space. Fortunately, we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm still working in digital marketing and still doing my business, and it's going pretty well. And so I guess that's my quick story.
Great, thanks, Liam. And yeah, it's been an interesting few months for everybody. So today's topic, we're going to be looking at SEO, and specifically how you can leverage SEO for growth, to build your presence, to make yourself more visible, hopefully to generate new customers as well. So of course, guys, we are going to be taking questions. So the guys on the Facebook Live broadcast as well, we are monitoring that feed. So as we go through the webinar, please do put questions in chat. Please put questions in the Q&A module for Liam, and we will make sure that we can relay those to him. So just to start with, maybe SEO is one of those sort of amazing things that can be seen as super complex, right? And quite scary. Nobody really knows what it is. Sometimes it can be quite intangible. So maybe start by giving us a little bit of a definition of what it is and what the benefits of SEO are.
Sure. So I guess the first thing to say is that it does sometimes seem pretty scary and complicated from the outside, but honestly, once you start to get into it, it's really not that too difficult. So hopefully we can get through it today and walk away with a better understanding. But to give you a basic definition, so obviously SEO stands for search engine optimization, and it's a practice of it's a digital marketing practice that basically you use different tactics, a lot of them having to do with content creation, to appear on the first page of Google search results for certain keywords or phrases. The reason businesses like to use it is because that is the number one thing that people do when they log onto the internet, is they go to google.com or just type into their Chrome browser and start searching. So if you can show up on the first page of Google, you're in a pretty good position. So SEO refers to all the different things that we do to help businesses get up onto that first page.
Okay, so it's all focused around content. And what sort of content can help with SEO?
Sure. So I guess just to kind of define content basically means anything that's on your website, whether it's written text, video, imagery, even things like search bars and buttons. But when it comes to SEO, there are a few types of content that really, really matter. And the big one is text. Specifically, long form content is usually the best type of content for SEO, but all of the text on your website is really, really important to search engine optimization, because right now, if you think of Google as kind of like a person, they can read really well, but they're not so good at looking at pictures and videos. So text is probably the most important. But that being said, Google has a bunch of different things it uses to kind of grade websites and how good they are, and they use that information to then rank them. And having diverse types of content on your website, so including video, infographics, and even clickable things like quizzes and other bits and pieces, all of that factors into SEO.
Okay, so it can be quite broad, but you'd say that long form written content is probably the most influential.
It's the one I have the most success with, and it's the one that I think still at the moment is what Google is really pushing. But that's not to say that's not going to change. SEO changes all the time. But for now, as of September 9th, 10th, 2020, that's my answer.
Okay, fair enough. Things can change. So, outside of what it is, why is it a useful or productive tactic for freelancers specifically to focus on when they think about the effort they put into their own business and marketing themselves?
Sure. So when it comes to digital marketing, I mean, so many businesses are already online, and with COVID happening to us, there's so many more that are going online. So your web presence is really important. And like I said before, the number one thing people do when they go on the internet is use Google. So, and I always say this to my clients, think about the last time you actually clicked next to go to the second page of Google. Nobody does that. Everybody sticks to the first page. And if they don't find what they want on the first page, they're probably just going to search again for a different phrase. So appearing on the first page is just, when it happens, when you get onto the first page for a really good keyword that's really related to your industry or to what you do, you can see the amount of traffic coming to your website just grow exponentially. And for so many businesses, that's the name of the game, is getting more organic traffic to their website. When I say organic traffic, just to clarify, I'm talking about people who find your website through a Google search or a Bing search, and not by typing in the name of your website or clicking on an ad. When we're talking about organic traffic, it's people who are looking for whatever it is your business serves. So right away, if you can get somebody to come to your website through the first page of Google, it probably means they were looking for what you are talking about already. And so you kind of have them like a warmer lead when they get to your website. The other reason it's really good for freelancers is because it is affordable, more affordable than some other digital marketing tactics out there, especially if you learn how to do some of it yourself. Saying that, I might put myself out of business, but it is really useful. If you know how to do some of the basic stuff, you can bring traffic to your website without really spending much money at all. Whereas if you were to take out Facebook ads or to do Google AdWords or something like that, you have to have a budget. So if you're a freelancer or startup on a budget and you're looking for a way to get more people to your website so that more people know who you are, it really is hard to beat search engine optimization as a tactic.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. And I think the key for me, and maybe we can explore this in a little bit more detail later, is context, right? We always find, and in our experience at Rounded, that when we've paid for advertising, clicks, Facebook ads, those sorts of things, essentially what they're doing is, in the main, interrupting people who are doing something else. And so you're sort of barging your way into somebody's attention to deliver a message around what your product or service may be or what benefit it may be to them. With SEO, you start from a position of context. Mm-hmm. So it's allowing you to answer a question that somebody is asking at that time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, for example, if you are a wedding photographer and you manage to get on the first page for wedding photographer Geelong or wherever you live, that means that somebody who goes to Google and types in, wedding photographer Melbourne or whatever, they're already like I said, they're already looking for you. And so if you're on that first page, and your website looks really nice from Google's perspective, then you're going to be really well positioned to bring that person on and start nurturing them as a lead.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Okay, well, let's get into a more practical part of the conversation now. So, if we've got obviously a number of freelancers here, all of whom are interested in this, if you're somebody that is on square one and thinking, okay, well, I've heard great things about SEO. This is something I can learn and do myself to a certain extent. Where do you start? What sort of, something practical that we can give somebody as a structure to say, okay, well, this is probably one of the first few things you need to do.
Sure. So the first thing you need to do is kind of put yourself in your customer's shoes, or whoever your customers or clients are, and think about what they might be looking for if they were to sit down and start looking for your business. So like I said, let's take the wedding photographer example again. Just sit down and get a notebook out and just start making a list of questions that people might be asking about a wedding and a wedding photographer. So best wedding photographer, best wedding venues for photography might be something that they might search, or how to know whether a photographer is good, or they might think of best times for photography for your wedding. And write those all down and then use a keyword tool, which I can show you how to use one, to kind of see there's ways to look into what data Google has out there. And you can kind of match up what you would guess people are searching for with what the data says on Google. And suddenly you'll have a bunch of keywords and phrases that are related to your industry, that people are searching for, that people are searching for. And you can start to build a strategy around that. So step number one, come up with some ideas of what people are thinking about when they're thinking about your business. And then step number two, map that to some keyword data.
Okay. Do you want to quickly show us the keyword tool now, Liam?
Yeah, it's probably a good moment. So let me just share my screen here, and I'm just going to share a tool with you quickly. So keyword tools, just to give you a rundown of what they are, they're things that people like me use a lot to, like I said, figure out exactly what people are actually searching for around any given topic. There are paid ones that I use because they're a little bit more accurate, but if you're on a budget or you don't want to pay for one because you just want to do a little bit of SEO, my number one recommendation is this website here, which is called Ubersuggest. It's run by a guy named Neil Patel. He's a big name in SEO. And this is probably the best free tool. So when you go onto Ubersuggest, this is the address here, just neilpatel.com/Ubersuggest. And you'll be met with this screen, and you can enter either a website or a keyword here. So for what I'm talking about now, the best bet is to probably just enter one of the keywords that you were thinking about. You can, of course, select the country so that you're looking at your audience, especially if your audience is in one specific country. And I already did one a little bit earlier. So I was thinking about photography for some reason. I don't know, it was on the brain today. And I thought, well, maybe what's something that somebody might be searching is how to take a good selfie. That could be something you could turn into an interesting article or piece of content. So I took that search here, and this is what you get dumped out. You get a bunch of information about that keyword specifically. And I'll just go quickly through what this is. So this basically means that 9,900 times a month, people search for the word how to take a good selfie in the United States. I could change it to Australia if I wanted to. So that's really good for me to know that 9,900 people are searching for that keyword. That means there's a lot of people who type that into Google every single month. And then SEO difficulty is the other really important one to look at. This basically tells you how hard it's going to be to start ranking for that keyword if you try writing a piece of content around this keyword. So SEO difficulty, if the number's low, that's a good thing. And you can see Neil does a nice job just telling us right here that it's easy. This shows you the volume as it changes over time. And down here, this is my other favorite thing that it does. It gives you a bunch of information about other keywords that are very similar. So we see that people Google how to take a good selfie for guys 880 times a month. So that's another one you might want to go after. But as you can see, this tool really gives you a good idea of what people are searching. And the last thing I'll show you here is that it also shows you the best content pieces that are talking about this already. So if you want to see maybe what some other people have done or what your competitors are doing, this is a good place to. So the reason I like this tool is it's pretty simple to use, and it really does give you some really genuinely good information that will start pointing you in the right direction of the kinds of words and phrases you want to be putting in your content on your website to start ranking.
Awesome. That's a great tool. So I think it answers a question that we had in the Facebook live feed from Gerson, who asked, some SEO tools can be fairly expensive. Are there any cheaper or freer options there? So Gerson, hopefully, that's a great place to start in terms of a resource that's free around researching keyword tools. Cool. Okay. So what next then? You're somebody, you've had a look at a keyword search. You've thought, okay, well, let's use that as an example. I reckon I could write a great blog post on how to take a good selfie. Where do you start with that? Like, what's the next step then?
Sure. So the next step, kind of off the back of what I was just showing you, what I like to do next is take a look at what other people are doing. So whatever tool you use, just take a look at what the best articles around that topic are right now. You definitely don't want to do anything close to plagiarism, just to say that flat out. But you do want to use some inspiration. So see what topics people are talking about, what subjects do they cover, and maybe think a little bit about what subjects don't they cover. Because in order to outrank them, meaning that you'll be higher up on the Google search results than them, you'll need to be pretty creative and come up with a piece of content that goes beyond what other people have already done and is written intentionally to perform well on Google. So I could probably talk for 3 or 4 hours about the different things you can do to make a piece of content perform really well for SEO. But let me get the basic one out of the way, the most important one. And that is, and you may have heard this before, that you want to write really good, high quality, easy to read content. So what does that mean? Written in plain English or whatever language you're writing in. It means written in straightforward, easy to understand language. And also really importantly, you want to make sure, especially if you're writing long form content, that you're making it user friendly. So that means you don't want to just post 3,000 words that are just a bunch of paragraphs, right? Because anybody who looks at that, it's called a wall of text. The first thing you do is close it out. You don't like that. And Google knows that people don't like that. So Google likes it when you use things like subheaders, bullet points, and other little things to break up your content. But also, as you're writing this piece of content, you want to be inserting those keywords that you found throughout the content in the most natural way possible. So you don't want to make it sound like a robot where you're just cramming every keyword in there, but you do want to start sprinkling those throughout the content. And then you publish it. And hopefully, it will take a few days for Google to understand that it's live. And then once it does, hopefully you'll start to see people coming to that through Google and your traffic will start to go up.
Awesome. And I think there's probably something else I'd like you to talk about here, in that, in addition to the fact it might take a couple of days for Google to recognize the fact that you've posted some new content, there's also a broader lag, isn't there, between posting content and it actually delivering results in terms of organic traffic. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yes, the sad truth about SEO is that it is not a quick thing, and that's something that people need to understand going into this. It's a long-term strategy. The reason for that is just because the way Google works and other web search engines work is they just take time. It takes Google just a little while to figure out when something new has been published and whether or not it's good, and to figure out where it should go. And also, over time, the more you do SEO, it grows exponentially, right? So if you're a tiny, brand new website that's only been open for a few months or a few weeks and you haven't done anything with content, it's going to go slow. But once you publish a piece of content, I usually say it takes about 3 to 6 months for it to really start to pick up. But the more you do it and the more frequently you publish, the quicker things happen. And so for big websites that are really good at SEO, it's much faster for them. So you can kind of think of it like a wheel rolling downhill, right? The longer it goes and the more you push it, the faster things pick up.
So it sounds like, as well as understanding that it's a long-term strategy. right? So it's not just going to be one article. You need to be posting consistently on a variety of different topics. You're sort of spreading the net as wide as you can. And as you say, that the more you post, the bigger asset, the more value that content has, and the more it's going to be able to draw people in to your website who will be interested in the kind of services that you provide.
Yeah, definitely. And I like what you said there about value. That's something that's really important. It's really important to remember with SEO, the content you're creating really needs to have value to your audience. So that's why I like that how to take a good selfie example, because honestly, the article, if you were to write that article, really should walk people through the process of how to take a good selfie, how to find the right lighting, what camera lens to use and all of that. It shouldn't be about selling your product really hard. You do want to have calls to action throughout all of your content, directing people to get in touch with you or go to your contact page or whatever it is. But for the most part, the content really needs to have a lot of value and offer something to your audience. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, Google likes it. But second of all, there's no real point in doing SEO if when people get to your website, the content isn't interesting or useful or engaging. And people like that. That's what people want. So if they get to your website and the content is written really poorly, or it's all about sales, or it's not very helpful, or it's not organized well, you're kind of wasting your time.
Awesome. Well, we've had the same question from Crystal in the Zoom room, and also again from Gerson on Facebook Live. That they asked, what's the ideal word count for a blog post, or is there an optimal length for a post that leverages SEO the best?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that you should never just write for an arbitrary word count, because, and this is something you and I have talked about, Ollie, recently actually, is you don't want to be just cramming words in just to get to some arbitrary number. And you definitely don't want to cover too much in one article, right? So this article about how to take a good selfie, I wouldn't want to go into how to take a good selfie for guys and how to take a good nature photo. You want to kind of stick to a single topic. But I could probably end up writing about 1,500 words about how to take a good selfie. So sorry, that's a long roundabout way to say that I do think if you are going to publish content, what we do see is that 1,300 words to 1,800 words is pretty good. And anything longer than that actually does pretty well. There seems to be not too much of a cap on terms of the long end. But in order for SEO to really start working, you usually need at least 500 words on the page, and ideally closer to 1,000 to 1,500. The exception to that rule would be obviously for certain parts of your website, like your homepage. You probably don't want to have 5,000 words on your homepage because it would just be too much. That in those cases, it is okay to have 300 words or 150 words just because it's a product description. And you can even maybe fit a keyword in every once in a while. But when it comes to SEO, I think it's probably more important to think long form, longer content, closer to the 1,300 word count.
Excellent, thanks. And that's actually a beautiful segue into the question been asked by Rashid in the Zoom room, who says, SEO optimization versus readability. How do you draw the line there? And I think that's a great question, because I know that it's something, an issue as somebody who's written a few blog posts myself that haven't necessarily performed that well from an SEO perspective. It's really hard, and it can actually influence your writing if you've constantly got this SEO, I need to write for SEO in the back of your mind, and it's not something that you're used to doing. So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, that's a good question. It comes up a lot. And I think my answer is that readability is SEO. And Google's very, very transparent about this. If you go on Google's blog, you can probably find a ton of blog posts on there of them talking about what they really, really want is for people to write like a human, and more than anything else. And so that's why they want you to use simple language. You might think, some people might think, well, good writing means using lots of big words, but Google actually would prefer you use simple, straightforward language because that is readable. Where people get tangled up is this whole keyword business that we're talking about, because there was a time back in the ancient Jurassic days of SEO when if you crammed a bunch of keywords into one single article and hit publish, you would probably get to the first page if you wanted to. But let me be clear, that is not the case anymore. you should never, ever, ever force a keyword in where it doesn't fit. So if you find a keyword that you can't figure out how to put it into your article, don't sweat it. Focus more on making a really good, enjoyable, engaging, well-written, and structured piece of content, a piece of content that's really organized. That's far more important. And the rest of the SEO stuff, there's technical stuff that you have to do. Certain things like some of your subheaders, you just need to mark them as an H2, which is something you can actually do in a Word document. But for the most part, when it comes to readability, if you're writing for humans and you're writing for your audience and you're putting the time in and you're making it a quality piece of content, you're already doing the SEO side of things. It's just a matter of maybe after you finish, go back over the article and see if you can fit a few more of those keywords in.
Awesome. And just for the uninitiated, you mentioned about tagging a subheader as H2. This is where we get sort of into that, maybe more technical type of jargon that maybe not everybody is fully across. Can you just perhaps explain what that means?
Sure. So, I'm going to try not to get too deep into the technical stuff because a lot of this stuff is, it is pretty complicated. But with H2s, and that's not a complicated one. So
where might you see it, H2? Like we've probably all seen it, but where might you see it and what does it mean?
Well, what they basically are is when you're reading an article, next time you read a really long article on the internet, you'll see as you go along that they'll have subheadings. The subheadings might be like, let's go back to the selfie article, right? So one subheading might be getting the writing light, and then that would be bolded and maybe a little bit bigger in the article, and then there would be a few paragraphs about getting the writing light, and then the lighting right. And then they might have the next one that says, how to apply makeup for your photo shoot or your selfie. And that would be a different subheader and it would also be big and it would also be bolded. So when you see those are called headers. And basically the way what Google calls them is H1s, H2s, H3s. H1 is the biggest one, H2 is smaller, H3 is smaller. So once you're aware of those things, you'll start seeing them everywhere you go when you're on the internet. Next time you're reading an article, I promise you'll notice that there's subheaders that are different sizes. And the way I like to put it in terms of SEO is that with those subheaders, you're basically putting up a little red flag to Google saying, hey, this is important. This is a really important part of my article. That's why it's bolded, that's why it's bigger, and that's why it's tagged as an H2. And when you tag it as an H2, you can do that if you use Google Drive or if you use Microsoft Word. You can actually do it right on the same tool panel where you would format the text, like where you would put something as bold or font. You might see it as heading 1, heading 2, or H1, H2. And you can also do it right in WordPress as well, same way. So it's pretty easy to do. And it's a good idea to try and get a keyword into those tags because, like I said, you're putting up a little red flag every time you make something in H1, H2. You're just kind of telling Google, like, hey, pay attention. This is an important phrase.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to mention is, guys, wherever you're editing your document, whether that be a Google page, whether that be Word, whether that be WordPress or anything else, any standard text editor has those formatting features. And rather than just bolding and manually changing the size of text, use the heading or H1, H2, H3 features because that's how you can put that red flag up.
Yeah,
guys, I can see a lot of questions coming in. This is great. We will get to all of them, but we're just going to move on to perhaps the next aspect and the next question. So, guys, if you do have questions or you put them in, we will get to them. Please keep them coming. So we've covered identifying keywords. We've covered tips on how to get the best out of your content. But there are also, we can't ignore the technical environment completely, can we? There are some technical things that quite simple things, but some technical things it's good to be aware of, and it's also good to have half an eye on that will help SEO as well. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So technical SEO is part of the game, and it's something you will come to understand if you read enough about SEO. But basically, these are the little things you do in the back end of your website where you change certain things to just make your website run better. Google does read all the text on your website, but it also is paying attention to how user-friendly your website is. And the big thing there is basically how quickly your site loads. Everybody has had that experience where you go on a website and it takes more than 2 seconds to load. And it's actually shorter than that. The studies show us that people have almost no patience for a slow loading website, and Google doesn't have any patience for it either. So if your website is loading really slowly, which can be caused by a bunch of different things, like images that are too big, or maybe you have some weird code on the back of your website from whoever built it, those kind of things slow down your website. And if that's happening, you're really not going to be able to do much with your SEO until you fix those problems. But there are ways to fix them. So Ollie, if you don't mind, I can show a quick tool that people can use to. Sure. So again, a free tool. My favorite one, though a friend of mine today told me about another one that Google runs as well, but I'll show this one very quickly. Sorry, here, there it is. So this is GTmetrix, and again, the URL is just right here, gtmetrix.com. And this one allows you to test your site speed. So you just enter your URL here and hit test your site. I'm just gonna pull up what it looks like. I just did a random one on the Sydney Morning Herald, and you get graded here for how quick. So good news, the Sydney Morning Herald, a B and a C. These are two different types of scores, but they're basically telling you the same things. They show you how quickly your website loads, and here they list off all of the different things that go into making your website fast or slow, and you can see they're actually doing really well, but they have a few here. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, reading these phrases like minified JavaScript and leverage browser caching. These are really complicated terms, and I'm not even going to pretend to act like I know what they mean. But I will tell you that there are plenty of forums on Google and other places where if you Google this issue, you can actually pull it down here and it shows you more information. If you copy and paste this and put it into Google, you probably will find somebody who's talking about how to fix it. They might recommend a plugin. And worst case scenario, get in touch with a developer and see if they can help you, because that is going to put not just a big holdup on your SEO strategy, but also just on how much people are enjoying your website.
Cool, thanks, Liam. I think that the point there is that, you know, I'm totally not technical at all. I wouldn't understand what any of those things mean, but I guess it's about knowing. You know, you can put, as you say, you can put all that effort in, and if you need some technical assistance to sort out a slow load of your website, then at least using a free tool like that will guide you towards the fact that you may need some help. The other thing that can, it's almost the holy grail as well. The other thing that can assist with SEO and just the overall visibility and I think credibility of your website are backlinks. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about backlinks, what they are and why they're important.
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the other missing piece that we haven't gotten to yet, and it's really important for SEO. Backlinks basically means that those are the links that are pointing from different websites to your website. And it's a good thing when that happens. So basically, Google kind of has a, you can think of it like a report card on every single website. It's called a domain authority, or DA. And that number tells you how powerful a website is in Google's eyes. It's usually scored on 1 to 100. And so, for example, a website like Wikipedia would probably be 100. Whereas if you start a new website tomorrow, it's going to be a 0. So if you can get websites that have a higher domain authority to link back to your own website on their site, that's really good for SEO. The reason being that Google basically says, this trustworthy website that I already know and I already trust is pointing to this other website that I don't know so well. It's kind of like when somebody introduces you to their friend, you're much more likely to trust their friend. So, I think it is important, and there are certain ways to go about doing it that are sometimes hard, sometimes easy, and usually pretty time consuming. Just to touch on what some of those are briefly, the best one, the one that I have the most success with, is guest blogging. So you might, for example, let's just keep going with the whole photography idea. Perhaps you go into Google one day and you just start typing in things like photography blogs or best photography blogs or photography magazines, and start pulling up those websites and just take a look at you know, do they accept guest posts? You can poke around. Usually it's on their about page or their contact us page. And if so, ask them if they'd be open to having you write something for them. If you're a writer, you can write it yourself. If not, you can hire a writer to write something in your name, like ghostwriter. And then ask them to publish it. And when they publish it, they'll usually put a bio, or maybe you can sneak a link into your website into that article. Don't sneak it in, ask them if it's okay. And then they'll post it, and then voila, you've got a link posting to your website. But the more backlinks you can get coming back to your website, the more powerful Google is going to see you, and the more likely you are to rank on the first page.
On mute. Awesome. Thank you, Liam. Cool. Well, if there's, I think we've actually got to the point where we've got a ton of questions now. So are you okay if I start, if we move into to questions from the audience, Liam?
Whew, okay, yeah, let's see.
All right. Well, let's start with Pete. So Pete in the Zoom room, this is a great question actually, asks, for someone like me, I'm a freelance video editor and I'm not writing blog posts or original content, but rather showcasing client work. How can I leverage SEO to drive people to my website?
Good question. So there's a few ways you can do that as a videographer. So first of all, I don't know what type of videos you make, but if you make anything that has conversation or dialogue in it, like for example, this conversation we're having, including a transcript of that is a really good idea. So you can maybe post the transcript right below the video, or you could write a blog article about that video and embed the video in there. So you could write a little bit of a summary of what you did and the different tactics you used and get some text onto the page that way. Also remember that even though you do make videos, you probably have other parts of your website where you could use some text. So your services page would probably be the big one. If you have different services, like if you do, you know, or I don't know, maybe you do corporate videos and you also do wedding videos and you also do event videos, you could have a page for each one of those. And that's an opportunity to get some text on the page, to use some of those keywords, to put them on there and, you know, use text as well as video to talk about your services.
Cool. Thanks for that. Hopefully that answers your question, Pete. And perhaps a nice segue into another question from the Facebook live feed, again from Gerzen, who asks, does publishing YouTube videos on a website have any positive effect on SEO? Curly one.
Sorry, did you cut out? Was that in, did you say embedding?
Yeah, sorry. Does publishing, if you publish or embed YouTube videos into your content, does that have a positive effect on SEO?
Yes, it does, because as I mentioned earlier, Google really likes diversity of content. So if you have a blog article that has a couple of videos embedded into them, or maybe an image or a graphic, or even things like a pull quote, Google recognizes that. And it does like that. Now you know, embedding the video just straight from YouTube rather than loading the video onto your CMS, your WordPress or whatever, that's fine too. You know, the thing about search engine optimization, if you're somebody who has YouTube videos on a YouTube channel, just remember that the phrase search engine optimization, I know I've been talking nonstop about Google, but remember that every website where you can search, they have their own algorithms with their own you know, tactics that people can use, and it's search engine optimization. So YouTube has its own search engine, and that means that when you're uploading your videos to YouTube, you want to make sure that you're filling out that all of that information on there, you're tagging it, you know, with the right tags, you're writing a nice description that explains what it is. That's going to impact your SEO if you're embedding that video onto your website.
Cool, thanks. And the next one is from Michael. Michael asked, does SEO work better if you are also running paid SEM? And we might need to explain what SEM is as well.
Sure. So paid SEM, SEM stands for search engine marketing, and typically refers to paid advertisements placed throughout the web. Could be Google ads, or could be ads on your website. The answer is I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think that they're kind of two different games. I don't think Google will punish you or reward you if you're using a different types of SEM. I think for the most part, Google sees organic traffic as organic traffic, it sees advertising as advertising, and it's not going to push you one way or the other. I know plenty of people who really succeed at SEO without doing any SEM.
I think the important thing is there that Google knows the difference between a click on an organic search result versus a click through a promoted paid ad. And it sounds like what you're saying is that those that data, those analytics are treated entirely separately.
Yeah, I believe so. And you know, I'm not a paid search expert, so I really can't comment too much on that. But I'm not aware of any interference, positively or negatively, between those two things. I think it's pretty much a stalemate.
Great. Now, Ben has a question going back to the H1 and H2 topic that we were discussing. He says, should any heading be tagged as H1, or do we leave that to the CMS to make the page name H1?
So when you are writing the content, that's when I tag things up as H1 and H2s, because then when you copy and paste it into WordPress or whatever you're using, I can't say that this is true for every CMS, but for most of the big ones, they can automatically tell what's been tagged as an H1 and an H2. A human should do it because a human is able to organize the content that way. You kind of want to think of your H tags as like kind of like those Russian nesting dolls, right? You have like the title is a title tag, and then you have a big H1, and then underneath the H1 you might have 3 H2s, and under one of those H2s you might have an H3. You know, it kind of goes down in that nesting order, and that's really hard for Google to do on its own. You really need to have a human doing that kind of thing.
Okay, so Jack, it sounds like, yeah, sorry, Ben, to double check and make sure that all of those tags, heading tags, are there because you want them to be, and probably best not to let your CMS or content management system do that for you. Next question, they're coming in thick and fast now. Jack is asking, is there any hope to rank on the first page with a one-page website? If so, how long should the content be? Few questions going on there, I think.
It's going to be really, really, really hard. It's going to be really hard because Google does not have very much context, you know, for what your website is, and it's going to be hard to get backlinks to a single page website. It's pretty difficult. So I think it's a hard one to answer, but the answer is basically, I don't think so. No.
I guess it depends on what you're doing as well. If you're doing something that no one else in the world or very few people are doing, the chances of you coming up higher up a search list are probably improved than if you're doing something that thousands of other people are doing.
True, that if there's enough people searching for it that it's a viable business, then there's probably more than one person thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Next question from Melinda. This is probably one that a lot of our audience would ask. If I write a post for a client's site, then want to republish it on my site as a work sample, linking back to the original published version, is that a good or a bad SEO strategy? Great question.
Sure. So what we need to talk about in this scenario is what's called duplicate content, which is a no-no. So you don't ever want to copy and paste a piece of content from one website to another. And the reason for that is that basically Google obviously doesn't want people doing that because that's, in this case, of course, it would not be plagiarism. It's your own work. But Google is trying to fight plagiarism, and so it doesn't allow people to do that. And basically all Google will do is say that first one, you know, whichever one gets published first, that's the one Google considers to be the real one, and the other one it just ignores. So if you post something on your client's website first and then you copy it to your website, it's not going to do anything for your SEO because Google has already found that other page first and ranked it. But there's a few ways around that if you want to use that content. What I think might be really good opportunity is to create a case study around that piece of content so that you can talk about the piece of content. You can even talk about the subject matter, but you won't be duplicating the content word for word. You can also rewrite a piece of content. So you could take the piece of content you originally wrote and rewrite it, maybe change the structure of it a little bit, the order of things that you talk about, change a lot of the text, you know, even rewriting sentence by sentence so that the language is unique, and then you can republish it. And option number 3 is, you know, post it somewhere else you could post it on Medium or LinkedIn. If you want it to be part of your portfolio, you could publish it on LinkedIn or publish it on your Medium profile, because LinkedIn and Medium, they don't affect SEO if it's duplicate content. So that you won't be punished for doing that strategy. But short answer, don't duplicate content. Just don't do it if you can avoid it.
Great stuff. And now we're going back to the Facebook Live feed. I think maybe a question that we sort of answered before, but are there any tips that you have for SEO optimizing a smaller website? You know, is there something that you can do if you don't have a lot of text content, or you know, is it really you know, to make any impact, do you really need to have some sort of minimum weight of text on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard if you don't have much text. I mean, it's really not, it's really key. Text is really key. You can try to do some things, like you can try to get a lot of backlinks, maybe. That might balance out some of the lack of text because you have more websites linking to you. That is probably the best thing that you could do. But really, if you don't have much text on your website, it's just going to be a struggle. Maybe this isn't the right channel for you if you don't want to add more text to your website. You know, there are plenty of other marketing channels you can use if SEO doesn't fit. But if you do like text, if you do have the opportunity to put text on your website, highly recommend SEO.
Great. And finally, from Gerson as well, who's been a very good source of some good questions today. Thanks, Gerson. What is your opinion on AI-produced SEO content?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I can see my job slipping away. No, I'm kidding. I think it's cool. Like, I think it's pretty interesting and fascinating. Um, Gosh, no one has actually ever asked me that question. I guess it is a little disturbing to think that perhaps robots might be better at this than me, but I guess call me old school, maybe because I have a literature degree, but I don't think robots can ever really be quite as good as a real human being. So I guess my answer is like, come at me, AI, because I think I'm probably better at it.
There you go. I love the response. So we've got one or two more questions, it seems. So last call for questions, guys. If you've got something for Liam. So we've got another great one from Crystal. This is a great question, actually. She says, I'm a photographer and would love to hear about ways to optimize images for SEO, for example, via metadata.
Yeah, great question. And absolutely something you should definitely be doing every time you upload an image to your site is to add that metadata in. And the most important thing is the alt tag, which you'll see when you're uploading it to your website. It's one of the fields you can fill out whenever you upload an image to your website. And your alt tag is basically there to tell Google what the picture is of. So the best thing to do is to literally just write a description of what the picture is. So let's say, you know, you uploaded a picture of somebody looking at their cell phone. You might put in the alt text, woman looking at cell phone she's wearing, or you might write, woman in yellow dress standing on city street looking at cell phone. And that is really just to provide Google with some more context around what the image is, because as I mentioned earlier, Google's not so good at understanding images. It's really good at understanding text. So when you add the text to the image, you're basically explaining what Google is. You don't need to worry too much about cramming keywords into those alt tags. That's not really what it's about. It's more about Google knowing that you put the time and the effort in to make its job easier, and you're going to be rewarded for just that little bit of work.
Do those alt tags, do they help with accessibility as well for people who may have a vision impairment or something like that, who might use a screen reader? That's also an important aspect of that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes beyond SEO. And so much of SEO is about making the user experience better, right? So that also means making it more inclusive for people who may have, you know, certain impairments or may need a screen reader. Using an alt tag is basically just a way to make it easier for whoever is on your website to know what your pictures are. The other thing too, just quickly on pictures with SEO, is just to remember what I said about site speed. I find images are the number one thing that slow websites down. These people upload these images to their website. They don't realize that they're huge, huge files. I'm not saying you have to make the images smaller. I'm just saying you have to make the image file size a little bit smaller. It might mean reducing the quality just a little bit, but it probably will save you time because big images slow down websites.
Awesome. And finally, a follow-up from Ben. We're back on H1 and H2s again. And Ben asks, should a page only have one H1?
An H1, yeah. H1, that's a good point, Ben. H1, yes, only one H1. Well, let me explain that a little bit more. So H1 is the biggest one, is the big H1, right? And that should probably be the full title of the article or whatever it is you're writing. That should be your H1. There's also something called a title tag. Title tags are what you see when you have a tab open and you look at the top of the tab, you'll see the name of the article written over the top of the tab. That's the title tag. A lot of times, title tag and H1 are the same thing, which is fine, but a title tag often can be a shorter version of the article headline. So you might have a short title tag that'll fit nicely in that little tab and is really straightforward and to the point and includes a keyword. And then you might have a longer H1 that is like a longer, more journalistic style of a headline, but get keywords into both if you can. And then H2s, H3s, have as many as you want.
That's great. And for those on the Facebook live feed, Gerson has just posted a link for an app called Squoosh, I think is how you would describe it. And he says that's great for image optimization. So there you go, another resource that you guys can use to help make sure that your images don't affect your website speed. Well, given we've been through a ton of questions, Liam, can I just say that was awesome.